Hey everyone, welcome to the Eat to Win show where sports nutrition meets peak performance. Get ready for expert insights, real stories, and tips to help you win with every meal. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Winner's Circle and the Eat to Win podcast. I'm Samuel Bullard, and we're here to talk about all things sports nutrition and how we help athletes win. Today we have Abby Lewis, MS, RDN, CSSD, a sports dietitian in Richmond, Virginia, who works closely with teen athletes, athletic trainers, and families to promote proper fueling and healthy relationship with food. We'll be diving into how family eating behaviors impact young athletes, Red S recovery, and other key strategies that Abby has picked up from her experience as a registered dietitian. Thanks for being here today, Abby.
Thank you.
So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience a little bit, tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you became a dietitian.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Abby, and I started out as an art major in college and knew that I wanted to add on some sort of nutrition because I highlighted through all of the coursework and realized it added up to a nutrition major. Nutrition and art don't really mesh very well for majors in college. And so it did take me 6 years. But now I joke that I can tell people what or help people eat and make the bowl that they put it in.
There you go.
But so I went to University of Tennessee after my undergrad for my master's in public health and nutrition, and they had a combined internship, and I loved the program, and I got to really dive into adding on sports nutrition, extra weeks and kind of experiences. And my master's project there was also very focused on youth nutrition, and so I loved just being able to kind of mesh all that together. When I graduated, I went and moved back to Virginia and became an outpatient dietitian. And on site, they had sports performance, and it really got to be anything and everything to anyone. You got to name your kind of clientele and say what you wanted to see. And so I ended up seeing for the past 9 years, basically ages 9 and above. And then I moved up to Richmond under the same program to really head that sports nutrition program up at our Richmond hospital system. And so have been growing for the past 8 years here up in Richmond, our sports nutrition and outpatient program. And it's been a ton of fun. So I get access to athletic trainers and to strength coaches, teams, and just love that teenage population, because I feel like if we can fix it now or give them the tools that they can use to then prevent any potential pitfalls later, because I really get to see the whole spectrum of the young and where we can prevent things. Mm-hmm. And the older athlete and the older adult where, hey, if we had a different relationship with food 30, 40 years ago, things might be a little different. So I love that mix. And now I'm going into private practice to be able to do the same thing.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you'll be pulling from a lot of years and working with a very wide range of clients. So when you mean 9-year-old and above, what's the oldest client you've worked with?
93.
So there you go. Yeah. So full range. That's awesome.
He was a very active 93-year-old though. Yes.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So kind of pulling from that, very wide range of experience and different kinds of clients, especially when we're talking about the teen and younger, what are kind of some of the biggest misconceptions that you ran into and wish that you had, for all the people you weren't able to talk to, kind of what is the misconceptions you wish they could understand, especially when you're working with the teen and younger athletes?
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest ones is that athletes have to eat clean or only clean or healthy foods. Athletes are humans, just like everybody else, and we all enjoy a variety of foods. And having that included is just so much more fun and enjoyable. But also, when an athlete's trying to eat only clean or only healthy foods, that's usually meaning the exclusion of less processed, and really everything can fit. Even those processed foods or lower fiber foods have a place in an athlete's diet. And especially athletes have really high energy needs. So if they're trying to get all of their energy needs from these very specific foods and kind of cutting out a lot, it can get really hard. I mean, I've had a number of athletes come where they were trying to eat only whole foods. And it's like, that's admirable. I know you wanted to be intentional about your food choices, but that's a lot of fiber.
Mm-hmm.
that's going to take a lot of food. And they just couldn't physically eat that much to be able to get the amount of energy that they needed for the work that they were doing and eat that way. So there really is that balance. But yeah, that's definitely the biggest one I hear.
Absolutely. I've definitely had that conversation before. I'm trying to explain that, and especially the Whole Foods. It's like, yeah, Whole Foods, that's great. That's good to eat Whole Foods. And then you're trying to explain that is not going to be able to hit the calorie mark. Sometimes people looked at me as like, you're the dietitian. Of course, you should be telling me this. Like, what do you mean? Like, I can't, don't just eat apples. Yeah. I've definitely seen that misconception as well. I love that you brought that up. So during your practice, so I imagine a wide range of sports, like did you have like a main type of sport that you're working with? Like, were you really pulling from like mainly from like endurance, or is it just kind of wide range, any kind of anything goes?
I feel like what really sums up what we had built was anything and everything. It was every age. It was every sport. I mean, a lot of what we pull here in Richmond is like endurance athletes. And so there was a time point where we were working a lot with like the running clubs. So there would be a normal marathon training presentation. And then depending on the season, I was working a lot we had a soccer contract that would come around every winter and they would train in our facility. And so a lot of soccer, but I've gotten to do talks and counsel, swimming comes through quite a bit. And sometimes it would be lacrosse and sometimes we would have soccer was probably the most. But I remember having to learn and having to look up how to fuel an athlete for open water distance swimming and learning that there's a canoe that paddles along with them that hands them a cup of food attached to a stick and they get to choose what goes in it, or they
Crazy.
stick gels in their swimsuits. And I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. That's intense though.
Yeah. So I wrote, it was just a couple of months ago, I wrote my first 50-mile fueling plan. And
For swimming?
I was like, no, for running. And I was like,
Okay, I
oh
was like, wow.
it was a trail race.
Okay.
50 miler. I told him beforehand, I have not made a plan for a 50 miler before, but it went great. It's a lot of food.
Yeah, I bet. My stereotypical story with endurance athletes, especially runners, like running ridiculous distances, was the guy who basically he wasn't a dietitian, but he was like an athlete very big into nutrition, and he said he did the math, and he was like, well, in the number of calories I'm going to burn during this run, it was something like a 60-mile run. He's like, I need at least 2 pizzas. So he would order a pizza to the point where he thought he was going to be at the run and grab the pizza. I was like, there you go. You got salt, you got carbs. I mean, it's kind of high in fat. I don't know if my stomach can handle it, but if you can handle it.
Everybody's lived experience. Whenever I'm dealing with all of these different sports, it's, the athlete is the expert on what they need. And so it's like, okay, if that's worked for you, let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I do not think I could handle a pizza running, but apparently you could do it just fine. It was this pure fuel. So there you go. Well, it sounds like you had a lot of range. Was there a favorite sport that you're like, I loved when I worked with X sport, or you're just kind of any sport was super fun?
I've had fun with all of them. Yeah. From soccer to baseball it's all that hunger and that drive and wanting to be better and just supporting them however I can. It's so fun to see.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, I did want to dive in a little bit more because I think your experience, especially with younger athletes, I think is very valuable to our listeners. So kind of touching a little bit again on the younger athlete, how do you feel when you're talking to parents? So like we're talking to because a lot of times when you're talking to a younger athlete below 18, you're going to be talking to the athlete and the parents there. How do you navigate when you have parents and they have dieting ideas, but then you kind of are seeing what you think the athlete should do, and sometimes they might not necessarily agree? And really just how the parents' behaviors when it comes to what they believe is right for nutrition. How do you handle that when you're talking to a client?
Yeah. So parents are always trying to do their best, right? And I'm a parent. And so I know that we only have the best intentions for our kids. And so always coming with that frame of reference is, I think, really important. I don't know that I had as strong of that feeling before I was a parent. I mean, you want to advocate for your athlete, but the parent does too.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm talking with the athlete and the parents, I'm always listening for the talk that happens at home and how they describe eating experiences of what foods are allowed or what foods are had at home or why. Sometimes when we do hear those discrepancies of like a parent saying, oh, well, I don't eat this or you don't have that at home, I usually just start from a place of education of this is what your child needs. And I'll often pull up the health professional's RDA calculator and just put it in right there with them and say, okay, for a non-athlete, this is what we need and this is what's recommended. And then usually that blows everybody's mind of how high a calorie count can go.
Yes, it's always higher than what they thought it was.
And it's like, okay, that's totally fine, but this is what they need. And let's talk about how we can maybe include that and support that. And parents have they have a big effect. We know that role modeling is huge, right? We try and use role modeling for interventions to get kids to eat more fruits and vegetables, but it goes the other way too. You're the child seeing what the parent isn't eating or listening to how the parent is talking about their body or how they're treating certain foods. All of those things get emulated too, whether we like it or not. And when I'm counseling even an adult and maybe they're coming for weight concerns or whatnot for themselves, I usually take that time to say, okay, if you're a parent, if your child said the exact same thing as you're saying now, how would you feel? Are you good with that? Like, is that something you want them to be saying? And if it isn't, then, maybe we can find middle ground because we don't want anybody in the household, parent or athlete or child, to feel like they're singled out on what they can or can't have, right? We might eat differently. As a parent, I might not need the 4,000 calories that my child might need, but the same foods can be present at the meal and I can pick and choose how much I need versus them. And sometimes just showing them how it can be done or how we can have all the things and each choose our own amounts really makes it a little bit more doable, a little bit more realistic for them.
Absolutely. I love you highlighting that you don't want any family member to feel like they're singled out in what they can or cannot have. I think that's very helpful. And so when you're talking to them, you kind of answered this a little bit, but just to kind of circle back, when you see that young athlete, what do you do when you see that they're struggling due to specifically like the family, like the mom or dad specifically thinks they need to like lose weight? Because a lot of times it's really common with athletes. Athlete is convinced that they are eating too many calories and they're actually too skinny, probably, especially when you're to a lot of athletes. And so how do you specifically handle that situation where you got the parents are convinced that their athlete needs to lose weight, the athlete really doesn't, but you're kind of in the situation where it's because of the team culture. Honestly, the coach is probably in on it with them. Like, yeah, they'd probably perform better. They'd run faster if they're a couple pounds lighter. So how have you had to wrestle with that or handle that in that kind of situation?
Yeah, sometimes it's getting other healthcare providers involved too, right? So if they're not believing of me saying this is how much you need or this is okay for your body, we'll pull in like the pediatrician or we'll pull in a therapist to really make sure that everybody on the family is on board. It might be a situation where I need to have a conversation with the parents separately and talk through that, maybe not with the athlete, so that we can get on the same page. And the other, so especially when you're thinking about, needing to lose or gain, a lot of times I'm looking at growth curves because we're talking pediatric athletes. So I'm looking and saying, okay, hang on, like this is where they're supposed to be. And maybe the research doesn't even support that there's an ideal body type or anything like that. And then we'll talk through with the athlete, like, what are your experiences of, okay, so when you restricted, say, carbs or whatever it is, how'd you feel? Can you tell me about a meet when you felt so much better? And what did you have then? Or, we'll talk through like, did you eat breakfast and then did you fall asleep in class, right? Having those immediate proof points for them to be able to see, hey, I felt better when I did it this way. And sometimes it is just having to pull in more health professionals for more support.
Absolutely.
Because when everybody's entrenched in their beliefs and everybody does want the best for the athlete, it can just take a little bit of pride, because it's hard to separate our preconceived notions that an athlete's body shape, weight, size tells us how they're going to perform, right? those are not proxies for each other at all. You can have a bodybuilder who looks so strong, but they can't touch their hands behind their heads. It depends what you're trying to get out of it. So if your performance isn't getting better with losing weight, or all of a sudden we're seeing these health markers, we just kind of bring all of our proof points together and try and redefine what that healthy has to look like for that athlete.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say my perception of it is it's not necessarily that the parent, they're just convinced that the lower weight will equal better performance, and convincing them that there's actually other ways that they can improve performance that aren't lower weight. That I think a lot of times I can steer them in their direction. But you're right. Everyone's there is trying to they're talking to a dietitian because they want the best possible performance. And sometimes they're there because some sort of health concern has popped up. But a lot of times it's just they just want the best performance. So convincing them that this might be the better way. Yeah, absolutely. Stay with us as we take a short break to thank our sponsors. You're listening to the Eat to Win podcast with your host, Samuel Bullard. Liquid Fuel is a new sports and hydration product formulated by a sports dietitian to give athletes the edge to train and compete longer. It contains the low glycemic carbohydrate palinitose, designed to keep blood sugar levels more stable and to provide energy for 3 to 4 hours without the blood sugar crash seen in other leading sports drinks. Its unique 4-part electrolyte formula includes 50% of your daily magnesium to optimize muscle function. Liquid Fuel is naturally sweetened along with no artificial ingredients or colors. Currently being used by high school, collegiate, and professional teams, Liquid Fuel allows you to live your life with confidence knowing that you're properly fueling your body. Visit drinkliquidfuel.com and use the code MSD10 to get 10% off your order. All right, welcome back to the Eat to Win podcast, where we're talking with Abby Lewis about fueling teen athletes and building healthy relationship with foods. Hope you enjoy our conversation. And so, Abby, something else I kind of want to talk about a little bit is dealing with athletes who have been diagnosed with Red S. If you could go into a little bit of detail about kind of what Red S is and why that would be a concern for parents and athletes if that's a condition we're talking about.
Yeah, so REDS is something I'm so glad that more people are talking about. I mean, we've had the position stands for a while, but it's getting such a bigger buzz nowadays. So relative energy deficiency in sport or syndrome, it's that low energy availability. So not having enough energy for the activity that you're doing and then also supporting what your body needs. And when we're not taking in enough energy to support the body, we end up seeing all of these different parts of this syndrome. We used to call it just the female athlete triad. So you had the 3 parts of the menstrual cycle, the bone function and disordered eating. We had just kind of women highlighted. But now we're seeing that it actually has a lot more parts to it. There's heart health involved and there's hormonal changes and the bone issues are still there. But, there's also psychological changes and just a whole array. And it's also impacting males as well as females. And so I would say that I'm trying to think of what I used to see it called because you would get referrals for it before, and they didn't even call it the female athlete triad. It was just like overtraining is what you would end up getting a referral for.
Overtraining syndrome.
Yeah, which exists, which is part of it, but
yeah,
it was kind of this catch-all. And now we can see all the pieces of the puzzle and people can be at different points. So I have athletes coming to me with suspected REDS from sports med docs. And so they might have gone to the sports med doc initially because there's a stress fracture or it was an unexpected fracture, a bone that shouldn't have broken, or maybe their menstrual cycle has changed and there's these things that they're worried about what the athlete's eating. So they'll end up seeing me and I'll take a deep dive into not only what are you eating now, but also what were you eating then? And give me the whole history of what was your activity level, when you started feeling this way, when the injury happened, but also maybe a couple of months beforehand. Tell me about changes. We'll look at growth charts. If there's a DEXA available, we'll look at, bone mineral density and all different things to try and figure out, is there now and was there a deficit of energy or nutritional deficiencies that are preceding this injury that made you more predisposed to have that injury. And then, so with REDS, a lot of the work is making sure that the calories are matching the output. But when I'm seeing an athlete, they've usually already decreased their output. So they've already, stopped training on the 3rd swim team and now they're just doing 2. And so some of it might have started to correct itself, but I feel like my job is not only to make sure that I teach them about, recovery from that injury, and get them back to sport, but also to make sure that they're aware what happened to begin with. What was the pitfall so that we don't repeat that? So like I had an athlete, a swimmer, a while back, and she was swimming on 3 swim teams at the time. And she had started to fall off her growth curve. And so her doctor had sent her. And she was just having trouble. I mean, she was literally swimming for 3 teams at once. She was having trouble keeping up with her energy needs. And
So
we
three
were
teams, can you
able.
briefly describe what her
Yeah.
training schedule was? Because that sounds incredible.
I don't remember, but I know that it was every day. There was at least one practice. There was one rest day, and I don't even think it was consistently. And then she was about to add on like Team USA or something,
So at
which is
least
like a one.
training basically every day with an
Yeah,
inconsistent rest day for multiple hours of swimming every day.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and loving it, which is fantastic. She was really good, but she just couldn't keep up. And so, we were kind of taking it through of, okay, well, you've been able to regain the weight now. You're feeling better. You're able to return to your 2 swim teams and you're doing great. You're feeling fueled, but you're planning on adding on the 3rd again. So hang on, let's make a plan. Let's figure out how much more are we going to need so that we don't end up in the same situation again,
Absolutely.
where you're exerting more energy than you can possibly take in. And so we had to make that plan and modify some foods because there were some foods she really didn't like, texture, taste aversion type things. And so just creating that plan so that she knew, okay, if I want to do it, here's what I got to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I love about the Reds is that they kind of tie together all these different symptoms that we knew probably were related, but some of them it's actually kind of surprising. But I feel like it's become much easier to explain to why it's bad, because before it was just like, yeah, you should eat more calories, and I was like, yeah, I should, but what if I could be lighter? I could probably perform better. But now it's like it's very tied together. It's very clear when you start explaining it, like, oh, this is actually pretty serious. I should take this seriously. So I do appreciate that aspect of it. My background is actually I grew up athlete wrestling, and I'm convinced there needs to be more research in the area of Reds and wrestling, because one of the clients that comes to mind was a wrestler who was a 106 pounder. So we're talking, small guy, hit puberty halfway through high school and was still trying to make 106. So was cutting significant amounts of weight just to make that 106 weight class. And then at the end of the year was just doing his normal regular bench press and tore a muscle just doing regular bench press he'd been doing all year. And I was like, if that's not Reds, I don't know what is. Like, so I imagine those kind of things, like people don't even put the pieces together. Like, oh, it's just a hard wrestling season. And I think if we did more research, that'd probably be helpful for a lot of wrestlers. But that's one of the stories that just pops into my head. Probably kind of like you for that with that swimmer.
Yeah, well, and it's that understanding of what we called normal for so long, and trying to dispel those myths is really hard. I mean, I think we've heard the myth of like, oh, runners just lose their period for so long that all of us are like, okay, that's not a thing anymore. But I still have people coming in, and I still have teenage athletes who you say, have you lost your period? And they go, well, yeah. No, no,
That's a problem.
that's not good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I guess taking away the fact that it's not normal. Like, this is a symptom of something that's a problem that could have some, even if it's the initial symptoms that they came in for, it's like, no, this could actually be connected to other things that you really do care about. Even if the original symptoms, like, hey, yeah, this is going on, I don't know if I really care, but it's like, this is what's happening. You're like, no, this could lead to injury. Like, maybe I do want to prevent this.
Yeah. And nobody wants time out from time.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, this could stop you from being able to perform. Okay, I'll listen. Fine. Okay. So I wanted to address another question so kind of in vein with what we've been talking about. So when we're talking about, especially with Reds and it's kind of that restrictive mindset that can lead to Reds, how do you kind of switch? And you touched on this kind of briefly, but if you have that athlete where you're like convincing them, hey, you've been in a restrictive mindset, how have you gone about trying to convince someone who's like, you see that they're kind of in that restrictive mindset, maybe they got from parent coach, and trying to show them like, hey, you're probably restricting too many calories, and they don't quite see it. Like, how have you gone about explaining that to them?
Yeah. So, oh gosh, I think it's the cognitive behavior therapy, is CBT. Oh man, really testing my my accounts, like I use all the skills, but what do I call it?
Yeah.
So I usually use presenting like back to them, a little bit of mirroring of, okay, well, so if this is true, then this is true. And just finding those pinch points of well, wait a second, no, that's not what I'm saying. Using that motivational interviewing to really reflect back what they're saying and what I'm hearing, and making sure that, are we on the same page? Are they aware of how this is changing their performance?
Mm-hmm.
And then I try and help the athlete to redefine what the goal is, right? So maybe they've been thinking that the goal is weight loss, and maybe we need to, okay, well, if you didn't have a scale, how would you measure that? How would you know? And does being lighter automatically mean that you're faster, or that you're able to, do whatever you're trying to do, or ride up that hill? Like, really testing that. And then once we've kind of figured out, I see your point about, this, but I don't want to add this. Okay, well, let's work to make those small goals and put a test goal in there. So maybe we say, okay, well, what's the food that you feel the most comfortable adding? And maybe it's sweet potatoes, because I hear that often. Sweet potatoes should have, like, I think they do have their own marketing group, but they are a safe food for most people. It's like, okay, cool. Let's add a sweet potato and let's make it, this big. And then let's see how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you ate that. Great. You didn't feel bad. Maybe you didn't feel good, but you didn't feel bad. Okay, my recommendation is actually that you get up to this big. So how about we go this big today? Mm-hmm. And then just inching it forward for them to feel a little bit more comfortable, and really challenging those ingrained thinking patterns. Mm-hmm. And then especially when we're talking about teenagers and youth, we're including the parents, right? Absolutely. We're involving the whole care team. If there's a coach that's talking a certain way about certain foods, maybe I go to the parents to talk to the coach, or if I know the athletic trainer, we'll have a conversation, HIPAA safe, without specific information and whatever the athlete is willing to disclose. But we're having everybody on the same page. And if it is a restrictive thinking pattern, where it's beyond my scope, then of course we're pulling in a therapist. We're making sure that we're getting the sports psychologist, their help if we can, to really think through it and support it. And that we're getting that role modeling at home for people to be able to see. I mean, I think through some of the eating disorder patients that I've seen, where we have to do family-based therapy, and we say, okay, mom and dad are going to check over your plate, and they're just your double check, and you can put your own food on, and let's help and see how we feel.
Awesome. Yeah. And so if you were talking to parents, so like just for any of our parent listeners, like they're kind of wondering, okay, so it seems like it's possible for parents realizing that it's possible for them to create a negative food environment. So what would be some advice, some motivated parents who want to learn, like, how do I create a positive food environment for my athlete, like to help avoid some of these problems so we don't have to have these conversations of like restrictive food eating? Like what can they do now to help prevent that from happening?
Yes, I would say that the first thing is to kind of assess what the food environment already is, and to listen for how you as a parent talk about food, or talk about your own body, and talk about, certain allowed or, whatnot foods. And then imagine that your child said the same thing. I think I said, see how you feel about that. Mm-hmm. To kind of reframe that all foods can fit. And to not put too much pressure on a parent too. There is no perfect. That it's not a matter of getting it wrong or getting it right. It's just, now's a great time for us to adjust and see where we can kind of loosen any rigidity, and kind of incorporate some of those foods that we might have said, oh, I can't have that. If you find yourself currently commenting on your child's body, every time that you want to say something about their body, change it to about their performance, or about their, smarts and their academics, and something that's, isn't a physical attribute of them, or talk about how strong they are. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how, as a parent, I don't think I ever thought about it before. Like, I knew that these were, things, but the term skinny mini was used in my family all the time. And like, you think now, you're like, oh, I guess that was a thing. And how can we do differently? And that's okay. It's never, all or nothing. Let's do a little differently. Let's make an impact today. Ellen Satter is actually one of the renowned researchers in this field of eating practices with kids, and all youth athletes are kids first. And so she created the principles of the divisions of responsibility. And that's where I always take it back to so what's your job as a parent? Well, you supply the food, you pick what's available. You go to the grocery store and say, here's your meal. You decide when it's available at meals and at snacks and when it's not available. And then you decide where. And maybe you're deciding where is the dinner table altogether. Maybe you're deciding where is in the backseat of a car on the way to practice. Maybe it's, on a picnic table at the lacrosse tournament. All of that is okay. And that's your prerogative as a parent. What, when, where. But the athlete gets to decide whether they eat and how much. And taking that pressure off of yourself of, oh my gosh, my kid isn't getting exactly what they need. Okay, that's not your job. Mm-hmm. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Once you've kind of established that what is my job and what isn't, then you're available for support. You provide the food, and maybe you're noticing, they're just not eating enough for the amount that they're doing. Okay, well, let's modify maybe the food available. Maybe we do need to take some of those whole grains and mix them with some refined grains so that they can get enough calories. They're just too full. They're not interested in eating it. Mm-hmm. Maybe we do change what we're offering sometimes to include some of those preferences and include some of those, more fun foods in more often. But I think parents are always really trying to do their utmost best to provide exactly what their kids need. Mm-hmm. And that's an amazing gift, but it's also a lot of pressure on parents. And I think sometimes just taking it back and saying, here's what we can do. If food equals pressure, then that's probably not a great place to be.
That's a great summary. He took me right back to my life cycle nutrition class because we watched a bunch of her videos during the class. So I was like, I had flashbacks right there. Yeah, but absolutely. I think that frees up the parents a lot to have a clear, what you're actually expected to do. And the fact that not deciding how much they eat is one of it, I think can help. I think that clarifying of who's responsible for what is absolutely huge. Because a lot of parents, I don't know, definitely in the culture that I was raised, there's definitely a little bit of clear your plate. So you're supposed to eat whatever's on your plate. And we're just now knowing that that's not the best way. Not that there's any, judgment if that it was the way that you did, but just, trying to get a little more into the intuitive eating, a little more of it. Just because it's on your plate doesn't mean it has to end up in your stomach. I think just those little things, especially for adolescent athletes. I love that. I love when parents start to realize that.
And sometimes it does take a little extra education. There are special cases where they have to eat 4,000 calories and they might be overly full, but that just means that my job as a parent is to modify what I'm providing so that it's possible. Mm-hmm. Or have a discussion on the other end for how much activity they're doing. But that's never the happier one.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I've enjoyed this conversation. We're moving on to the rapid fire round. So we're just going to do a couple of quick question and answers, and then we'll move over to our last question. So first of the rapid fire questions, what is your favorite quick and easy snack for teen athletes?
Cracker, cheese, and a fruit.
Awesome. Okay. Best advice for parents wanting to support their athletes' nutrition?
Keep at it. Educate yourself, educate your teen, and then don't stress. You're providing what you can.
There you go. All right. One nutrition myth you wish more people understood.
Ooh, that supplements are all safe and we should all be on them.
That's a good one. Best recovery food or drink?
Stir fry and soup.
Okay.
All the mixings all together.
There you go. The most rewarding part of working with young athletes?
Getting to see the aha moment, that everything clicked and that now that they've put the pieces together, you've just prevented something that would take them off the field.
That's good. I like that. Yeah. I definitely the aha moment, but especially connecting it with that you're preventing future injury or something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
My goal is for them to not end up in my office as an adult.
There you go. That's a good way to put it.
with the same problems in 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's just kind of if someone is interested in talking to you and learning more about kind of some of the things you had to say, what is a good way for people to get in contact with you?
Yeah, email is probably the best. I'm at the new private practice, Nourish to Flourish. So I can be found at their website, Nourish to Flourish RVA. My email is abby@nto2frva.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Okay. And you have any social media that anyone can follow?
Not that unless
Okay,
you
well,
like
I
my
guess
children.
LinkedIn. We'll say LinkedIn counts as a social media. I'll say loosely.
I get asked all the time by my athletic trainers, who should we follow? And can you create one? I was like, it's a great idea. I'll think about it. But I'm already trying to get my 1-year-old to stop picking up my phone. And that feels like an extra thing, but
Yeah,
I'll work
absolutely.
on it.
All right. Well, thank you, Abby. That's it for today's episode of the Winner Circle and the Eat to Win podcast. A big thank you to Abby Lewis for sharing her experience on teen athlete nutrition, family eating behaviors, and performance fueling. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your community. Until next time, keep winning.
Thanks for joining us on the Eat to Win show. Remember, every meal is a step toward victory. Until next time, stay strong and keep winning.